from Councillor Chris Fletcher. Okay, we come now to item number 10, which is a paper referred from the Appointment and Performance Review Committee, which is the updating of the Chief Executive's performance objectives. Councillors will recall that we set those objectives way back in June 2021, and this is an update with some small changes taking into account the annual budget. This has been discussed and approved by councillors on the APR committee, and the governance of the group that was enabled to make any changes that might be required consisted of myself, Councillor Fletcher, and Deputy Mayor Cashmore. The one change that is recommended by all three of us actually is to remove the objective 1E, which you'll see as a chair's recommendation there, improve representation and participation in local elections. And we're removing that on the basis that, sadly, I wish the Chief Executive did have the power to increase the participation and to increase the voting turnout. But all three of us felt that, like other requirements in the performance review that we have removed, if the Chief Executive isn't responsible for achieving that objective or doesn't have the power to achieve that objective, then it's very hard to hold them to account for not achieving that. So that's just by way of explanation. So this is a noting paper. I'm going to move it and ask Councillor Fletcher to second it.
Yes, I'm happy to second that.
Happy to do that. So it's been moved and seconded. Perhaps if we can begin with you, Jim, as the Chief Executive, any brief contextual comments that you'd like to make, and then I'll go to Shamil Sahib and Rosa Kim to give a more full explanation of the of what's in the amended performance objectives. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, councillors. Mayor Phil, you've done a good job of kind of explaining what I might have said. Really, this is an opportunity for us to set the objectives for the next 12 months in line with the 3-year objectives that were established in June 21. So at this point in the cycle, we're taking the opportunity to make any additions, amendments or adjustments to the objectives to make sure they accurately reflect our annual budget, any decisions that have been made, and to simplify anything by removing any unnecessary or unhelpful duplication of reporting. And Shamil and Rosa might have some examples of that. It's very helpful for us to be able to do this at this point in the year because it allows us to cascade the objectives to my ELT in a timely way. That is early in the annual planning cycle so that everybody's got line of sight to what's expected ahead this year. That is a separate process. We'll be bringing that back to the August Appointments, Performance and Review Committee. There'll be unaudited results for the August conversation. Of course, they've got to go through the NZX reporting cycle. But that's just to note that a review of performance is a separate process, and that'll be coming in the month or two ahead. Apart from that, I'll hand over to Shamil to answer any detailed questions or take us through a little bit of the detail of the way this has been done.
Thanks, Jim. Over to you, Shamil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, look, I think with your introduction and Jim's comments as well, it's covered some of the key points in terms of context. Just to add to that, these objectives were set for a 3-year period, and the intent of that was that we make just minor changes through each year if needed to align to changes in the environment and challenges council may be facing. So this is that minor change we're coming in for. The full review of the objectives will happen in 2023. So that's one point. And as Jim has mentioned, the actual performance review for the year will happen once the in August as well, later on as well. So that's just setting the context. And the changes we're proposing, I'll ask Rosa to work through the changes. As you said, Mr. Mayor, we are recommending we remove one of the objectives, and there's 3 minor changes we're proposing to existing measures as well as part of the recommendations that have come from APR. So I'll hand over to Rosa to work through them. We do have a number of ELT members and GMs on the call as well, if there's any specific questions that councillors may have as well in relation to any sort of measure or KPI. So over to Rosa.
Thanks, Shamil. Rosa.
Thank you, Shamil, and morning, councillors. So following the Appointments and Performance Review Committee meeting, some minor amendments were made and are highlighted in the attached.
Oops.
Oh, sorry, I've just lost my video. I'll repeat what I've just.
We thought we'd lost you. Yeah.
So following the Appointments and Performance Review Committee meeting, we've made some minor amendments that are highlighted in the attachment alongside the governing body paper. They are some minor wording updates to Objective 1C, Advanced Māori Identity and Wellbeing on page 1. Please note that the measure intent and the target setting has not changed. We've just made some minor wording updates to wordsmith some of the measurement statements. We've also added in a new measure of success for Objective 1D, support elected members' decision making on page 1. The measure highlighted improve elected member capability post induction based on the elected member capability framework will be used post the elected member induction program, and it will be a self-assessment framework. Lastly, there are some wording updates to reflect, maintain and improve for Māori senior leadership ethnic diversity targets for Objective 4A, and that's on the last page on page 5 highlighted. As Shamil mentioned, the delegated subgroup from the Appointments and Performance Review Committee have agreed on those 3 amendments and also the additional agreement to remove Objective 1E on improving representation and participation in local elections. I will pause there to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Rosa and Shamil and Jim. So I think this is reasonably straightforward, but open it up first of all for questions, and then we'll subsequently go to comments. If there are any questions, I haven't got anything in my sidebar yet. So I'm presuming everybody's quite comfortable with that. So we'll move. Oh, sorry. Question from Councillor John Watson. John.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm just really interested in that last point that was made in terms of gender identity balance and senior leadership, and the change that's been made in respect of the phrase maintain and or improve. How does that work in reality? So we've got here goals to increase by 3 Maori, Pacifica by 3, Asia, Middle Eastern, Latin American, African by 2 amongst that big geographic part of the world. How does that work in reality in terms of people in those positions not moving on? If people remain in the job, are these roles created, or are they contingent on people at that level leaving? How are those uncertainties dealt with in terms of that goal?
Okay, I'm not quite sure who's answering that. Shamil, you were leaning forward, so I'll take that as an indicator.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and Jim, you may want to add to that as well. So, with our turnover rates, we run at about 12 to 13% turnover in staff numbers across council on average. So that means there's always obviously opportunities coming up as staff are moving on, and so that with that turnover, we do have opportunities coming up, and that's probably the main way we actually are able to look at achieving the targets we've set over here as vacancies come up.
Okay, so just a quick follow-up, Mr. Mayor, if I might. Some bigger organisations internationally, when they're setting up programs such as this, they look at political and ideological diversity too, and how that might be more adequately represented in an organisation. So, for instance, that they find in some of the bigger companies in America where people that come from a particular political or ideological perspective, and they tend to focus around the major divisions that occur there, Democrats and Republicans, that's actually a more meaningful representation of diversity of view that is might be lacking in their organisation. So do we have any in any of the measures that are put up in terms of the ethnic diversity, do we go any further than that to perhaps capture a more meaningful political ideological diversity, given what exists in our city in terms of areas that are woefully underrepresented, not just politically, but also in top rungs of organisations such as the council?
If I could give a political answer to that first, because it's about politics, I don't think it would be appropriate for public servants, civil servants, local council officials, for us to have any regard to the political views of the people who work for us. They work under requirements not to allow their personal views interfere with their role. They're required to be neutral. So I can't imagine that we would do that. But Shamil, you might like to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would agree with that. So our focus is really on the ethnic targets we have set, for Maori, Pacifica, and the group listed underneath that. We don't go beyond that, just for the reasons you've outlined as well.
So I guess my point is, Mr. Mayor, and it's one that's quite well researched in academic circles, and I take your point about not giving people a 20-question test on which political party they support, but in terms of that socio-economic reflection, which for many people is a more accurate assessment of someone's overall diversity, and we used to have an element of that in New Zealand, and before kind of identity politics, became more prominent. So in terms of that socio-economic diversity, which I would suggest, certainly in some parts of Auckland, is a more meaningful reflection of true diversity, we don't really have any mechanism by which we can capture that through this process.
If I can just add to that, Mr. Mayor, so obviously legislations evolve over time as well, and there's, I guess, limitations on what information we can gather from candidates as well when we go through the recruitment process. So that's also a factor we have to consider, and that's one of the reasons why we obviously have kept this target confined to the measures we have here. Richard's on the line as well. He may want to add something to this.
Yeah, thanks, Shamil. Kia ora, everybody. Richard Jarrett, Director Group Services. A couple of points I'd make is, one is we know that we don't, our workforce doesn't reflect the profile of the communities we serve right across Auckland, in parts of Auckland, I should say. So there's quite a bit of work we're doing on both attracting the right range of candidates into council. Part of that is if you can't see it, you can't be it. So we are embarking on a journey of making sure that people can see people like them in local communities working inside council. So if I can see it, I feel I can be it. So we have to attract the right talent pools. And then secondly, internally, we're doing a lot of work around talent mapping and talent management to see what opportunities exist to grow talent across different ethnicities into different role types. That's a deliberate approach we are taking to make sure that we can both grow from within, and once people are here, they can develop skills, but also attract the right people into the organisation as well across different groups. Some of these targets that we have in here, you could argue, are measures in and of themselves, but it's more about the essence of what we're doing to grow talent and encourage people through different areas. On the question of some of the measures we're talking around, legislation doesn't allow us to recruit or screen for some of the factors being discussed, so we have to be really careful about where and how we screen candidates as we bring them in. And then lastly, our very interview panels that we set up in council for attracting the right talent, we're looking to make those far more diverse in the panel who are interviewing, because some cultures and ethnicities do have a bias for being interviewed in a different manner. So the types of questioning we use, how we engage, needs to be very different and sensitive to different cultures and ethnicities as well.
Thanks. Next question I have is from Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So I've got a question around B, and I don't have any point of difference with B. It's about removing that objective as it goes to the influence of the chief executive around representation and participation in local elections. So the question I've got goes to a specific example where there was a complaint, and this involved participation by, I think, Auckland Council employees at Auckland University, where there was a stand set up to, one, get people signed up, two, there was an ability for them to vote, but in the immediate vicinity there were people politically seeking them to vote for them at the same location, in the same proximity, which frankly was not desirable and not fair. That may or may not have been, and probably wasn't, anything that the council had much control over. But obviously the people from the council that were there engaged in improving participation were aware of it and didn't act appropriately, in my view. There was a complaint around this. So the question I've got, given that the chief executive won't have the ability to influence performance against this objective, how will the organisation make sure that that sort of behaviour doesn't happen again? Because it is of real concern that there not be influence on council's part that impacts on the vote in conceivably particularly sensitive parts of Auckland. Thank you, Jim.
Just to clarify one thing, this is not about removing the ability of the chief executive to influence. This is about removing that as a performance objective by which we can judge the performance of the chief executive, which is around participation and turnout. So the chief executive still has a role to play in broader areas. But Jim, do you want to deal with the specific question?
I know we've got Rose Leonard online, Mayor Phil, who is much closer to the particular circumstances in relation to the point that Councillor Walker has raised. Rose, I wonder if you might be able to comment on what actions we can take in that regard.
Sure, and kia ora tātou. I am aware of the issue that Councillor Walker is referring to. It was what we used to call a one-stop shop, where people were able to enrol and vote all in the one place. And he's also quite rightly recalled that it was very difficult to. We had no idea that people were going to be campaigning, and standing nearby our booth. But look, I've got a close eye on that this time, aware of the issues. We will be doing far fewer of those one-stop shops because they are very difficult to control and manage, and I am aware of that issue and looking at that, making sure that that doesn't happen again.
Thank you. I have no further questions, but I do have, we come to comments and a request for a comment from Councillor Chris Darby. Chris.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Chief Executive. Look, I do support this, being a member of the Appointments Performance Committee as well. But the question, Mayor, of course, is where does this responsibility lie? if not with our chief executive. And there is good reason as to why it can't reside with the chief executive as a performance objective there. But I would suggest, Mayor, that this performance objective should reside at central government rather than with our chief executive or at our council. And I say that, Mayor, because we're seeing a pattern of declining participation in elections at Auckland Council, but we're seeing it around the nation. And that should be of real concern to government, but it does not seem to be registering at government. In fact, they're not helping the situation at all. In their edicts that lean more towards centralised planning and control approach, which effectively is removing the discretion of councils and the validity of councils, not just ours, but all councils. So those edicts are the Three Waters reform, of course, and then the bipartisan edict of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and then the subsequent legislation that created the medium density residential standards. So, Mayor, I think what I'm wanting to say now is, yes, we relieve the chief executive of this responsibility, but we can't relieve ourselves of the responsibility to advocate to central government to pick it up. So local government is really on the precipice of becoming irrelevant at the moment. So where does this reside? I say it's with government. Coming up to the parliamentary elections, you see an enormous amount of expenditure promoting those elections, and a paltry amount is in support of the local government elections. So, centralised control is really contrary to all what's happening around council jurisdictions all around the world, where there's much greater local participatory democratic processes being put in place. But central government just doesn't seem to be remotely on that page at all. So, Mayor, I think we need to do some work and point this responsibility at central government, if not at our council. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. And again, I think there's it's a political question in a sense. We're not removing. I just repeat this: we're not removing responsibility from our chief executive for doing what is within our capability to do to promote, particularly turnout at elections. And I think for example, having the ballot boxes outside supermarkets is a small, practical and useful thing that we can do at our level. But we do need to look at the wider issues that you've referred to. And I support your analysis that the more government centralises and takes control over things that would normally be within the control of local government, the less relevant local government becomes in the eyes of the electors. And that is an important factor, I think, both in Three Waters and in the sort of thing that the NPSUD has done in removing placemaking and basic control over design features of houses to ensure their livability. So I think that will be a new challenge for the new council. And another challenge, in the same light is if you don't get media coverage of what we're doing, then you create anonymity on the, around the elected representatives. And people have said to me more often than not, oh, we're not going to vote because we don't know any of the candidates. Now, that's a bit of a cop-out to make that statement, but it is the statement that's most frequently made to me. And if you don't get good media coverage, you'll be getting some media coverage of the mayoral contest, but you scarcely get any media coverage of elections at a ward level. And you don't have party political labels in most cases, and then you don't get visibility of the individual at a ward level, then we perhaps shouldn't be surprised that those are factors that mitigate against a higher turnout and a much lower turnout than is healthy in a democracy. So those issues, Councillor, you're quite right, are all still there, and will need to be receive the continuing attention of council on an ongoing basis. I don't know whether there's a question there for officials to address, but I'll give them the rose if there's anything that you wanted to add, add to that? It's a broader issue, I think, and an appropriate issue that Councillor Darby has raised. Is there anything you want to add to that, Rose?
We are working with the Electoral Commission to try and get, you'll see some really great stuff out on Māori TV to get people to enrol and vote. So I think the Electoral Commission is picking up the pace, but the comments that you've made, Councillor Darby, are essentially political ones, but from a staff perspective, I think that central government does have a huge role to play in this.
Thank you. My next question is from Councillor Chris Fletcher. Comment, not rather than question.
Yes, I don't wish to pose questions at this point, and I thank you for the opportunity to have been involved in signing this document off to come to the governing body. While we've traversed quite fully the fact that the CEO can't be held accountable for a failure, perhaps in participation in democracy, I do think that we need to pause and reflect on what the challenges are looking out for the next year in terms of those strategic imperatives for the CEO, particularly in light of the experiences that we've had with COVID, with other cost escalations and so forth. I just want to commend the work that Shamil and his team and with Rosa that they've undertaken and the information that they have provided with me. And while probably nothing is perfect, I think it's a work in progress that is creating a better alignment with the work that Council and the challenges ahead for Council. And so I think perhaps Jim might want to reflect briefly on how this might be somewhat more seamless moving forward. I think there are some significant improvements in the strategic objectives that we are seeing in this document, and I welcome it. And again, thank those officers who have supported us fully to get this document to the governing body today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and I'll join with you in thanking Shamil and Rosa and the team for the work they've put into that. I think you've done a very good job. Much appreciated. Okay, we've got the next comment from Councillor Daniel Newman.
Oh yeah, just a brief comment, Your Worship. I just want to commend the report and to acknowledge that whilst we'll have a new mayor and a new deputy mayor and would have quite a few changes, but we will have a degree of continuity around the chief executive, and so I think that the report and the objectives here are appropriate, and so I share the comments expressed by others, but also I think that the removal, the exclusion of Objective 1E is critically important because, frankly, I suspect in this post-COVID, well, it's not post-COVID world, but the impact of some of the issues that occurred last year around declining social license with respect to lockdowns and the rollout of vaccinations is compromising the confidence and the trust of people in our community in relation to how they perceive a relationship with government and with governors. And it's most likely to play out in probably quite significant declining voter participation. I regret that. It doesn't sit comfortably with me that the turnout in my ward is one of the lowest anywhere in Auckland. I'd like to win, but I'd like to win with a much higher mandate in the form of a much higher voter turnout. So I do think there is a need to reflect that challenge. I think that Chris Darby is right, but I think inherent to any debate around voter turnout is the need to reflect on the public's confidence in the impact of decisions that are taken at central government, as Chris has pointed out, but also not to discount the impact of the lockdown and the rollout of the vaccination program last year, which was very patchy and which caused great concern amongst a great many people around the directives of central government as it related to people's personal health circumstances and the decisions that they were confronted with. So I do agree with the exclusion of Objective 1E, Your Worship, and I thank the committee for its recommendation on this matter.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I've got no further requests for comments, so I will put this motion on the voices. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried, and I think unanimously.